You don't just march into the house Deion Sanders built and casually confess you tried to tank his son's career. Kevin Stefanski really thought a quick, "I'm sorry," would magically protect his paycheck. Instead, he set the entire city of Atlanta on fire. Breaking tonight, Falcons fans are demanding the immediate firing of their brand-new head coach. When Arthur Blank hired Stefanski on January 17th, the belief was simple: bring in a two-time Coach of the Year and fix the offense. But after Stefanski admitted this morning that he intentionally sabotaged Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland to protect his own ego, the 404 declared open season. Local sports radio is in full meltdown. Fans are calling out the hypocrisy. How are you supposed to trust this guy to develop Michael Penix Jr. when he just confessed to burying a generational talent at his previous job? The pressure isn't just on the coach anymore. It's squarely on the owner who signed him. Reports now say Arthur Blank has called an emergency closed-door meeting to figure out whether there's any legal way to void Stefanski's contract. If you think this ends quietly, think again. If you want the real numbers on how much money Blank would have to swallow to fire a coach in February, stay locked in. Let's break down the contract. Here's how Shedeur Sanders is allegedly pushing a head coach toward the exit. To grasp the magnitude of the outrage boiling in Atlanta, you have to examine exactly what unfolded in Cleveland. This wasn't some minor disconnect over a playbook. This was portrayed as a calculated dismantling of a young quarterback's trajectory. During Stefanski's time in Cleveland, millions watched what critics describe as him undermining Shedeur Sanders on national television. It wasn't subtle. It looked obvious. Stefanski kept Shedeur glued to the bench holding a clipboard while scouts, analysts, and fans argued he was the most gifted quarterback in the room. And when he finally got on the field, he was boxed into rigid, outdated offensive schemes that critics say completely neutralized his elite talent, processing speed, and that so-called legendary playmaking magic. But critics say the ugliest part wasn't the X's and O's on the whiteboard. It was the shadow politics swirling behind closed doors. When the offense predictably collapsed inside that rigid system, Stefanski reportedly refused to own a single ounce of it. Instead, negative stories conveniently started leaking to local media. Suddenly, there were whispers about Shedeur's work ethic, his character, even his attitude flooding timelines. Detractors called it the oldest coaching survival trick in the book: tarnish the rookie to protect your own resume. Fans claim they saw straight through the smoke. They believe they watched a coach choose his ego over nurturing a generational talent. So when the Atlanta Falcons announced they were handing the franchise keys to that very same man, the city exploded. The front office clearly misread the temperature. They assumed the outrage would fade into a few angry tweets and heated radio callers. They figured fans would shrug, buy jerseys, and clap on Sundays. They were wrong. Within hours of the announcement, opposition organized at lightning speed. A Twitter account titled "Fire Stefanski" erupted, stacking 50,000 followers in a single day. A Reddit community formed with one mission: block the hire, ballooning to 30,000 active members. These supporters weren't just venting. They compiled spreadsheets, clipped video receipts, and highlighted stats they say proved Shedeur was sabotaged in Cleveland. Then it left the internet. On a quiet Saturday morning, more than 2,000 Falcons fans gathered outside the team's practice facility in Flowery Branch holding massive signs reading, "Sabotage has no place in Atlanta, and we won't forget what you did to Shedeur." News helicopters circled overhead. National networks cut into programming to cover the spectacle. What was supposed to be a routine transition spiraled into a full-blown public relations hurricane. The message from fans was unmistakable: you can't make us cheer for the villain. Protests outside a practice facility might look dramatic on the evening news, but let's be honest, that alone rarely gets an NFL head coach fired. You know what actually sends coaches packing? Money. And the architects of this uprising knew exactly where the Falcons are vulnerable. They skipped the PR spin room and aimed directly at the franchise's wallet. More than 200 long-time season ticket holders, fans who've paid for premium lower-level seats for decades, drafted a certified letter and sent it straight to owner Arthur Blank. The message was blunt: if Kevin Stefanski is on the sideline in September wearing a Falcons headset, they will not renew. And this wasn't empty noise. Several prominent ticket holders posted proof they had already called the ticket office and canceled automatic renewals. That's hundreds of thousands, possibly millions, in guaranteed revenue vanishing overnight. Corporate sponsors reportedly began phoning the front office, worried about the toxic cloud forming over the brand. Local sports bars hinted at boycotting watch parties. Fans flexed their consumer leverage, arguing that without their wallets, the mighty NFL machine sputters. When a billionaire owner feels heat like that, the usual counterpunch comes from friendly national media voices. As the protests gained steam, major sports networks rolled out analysts defending the Stefanski hire. Commentators labeled Falcons fans emotional, unreasonable, even toxic. They reminded viewers he's a two-time Coach of the Year and suggested critics simply don't grasp the complexities of roster building. Some even floated the idea that Shedeur-Sanders was the real issue in Cleveland, attempting to reshape the narrative in defense of the coaching fraternity. But the fan coalition anticipated that move. Each televised defense was met online with clipped press conferences, game tape, and examples they say contradict the spin. They highlighted moments where Shedeur appeared to thrive despite questionable play calling and accused certain analysts of protecting ownership interests. Instead of quieting the outrage, the media push only intensified it. Many fans took it as proof that the traditional football establishment would shield one of its own no matter the optics. And looming over all of it is a conversation national outlets tiptoe around: the cultural and racial dimension of the hire, centered on a white head coach accused by critics of undermining a high-profile young black quarterback. Critics say he benched him, undermined him, and allowed negative narratives to swirl around a supremely confident, wildly talented black quarterback in Cleveland. Then you take that same coach, with that same cloud hanging over him, and plant him right in the middle of Atlanta. Atlanta isn't just another NFL city. It's widely viewed as the cultural heartbeat of Black America, a place rooted in black excellence, empowerment, and leadership. The Falcons fan base reflects that identity. So when the front office appeared to overlook Stefanski's history and drop him into this environment, many saw it as a staggering sign of disrespect. Influential community voices quickly pointed out the league's uncomfortable history of traditional coaches clashing with outspoken black quarterbacks who refused to fit a quiet, compliant mold. Fans in Atlanta began drawing a hard line, declaring this mentality has no place in their city and rejecting any culture that seems to penalize young athletes for confidence and self-worth. And then there's the last name involved. Stefanski didn't just sideline any rookie. He crossed paths with a Sanders. Deion coach Prime Sanders has built a powerhouse brand that reshaped college football's spotlight. His son, Shedeur, isn't merely an athlete. He's a global figure with endorsement deals, a built-in fan army, and cultural reach that makes traditional executives uneasy. By clashing with Shedeur, Stefanski wasn't just making a football decision. Critics argue he stepped into the orbit of the Prime effect. That's why this Atlanta backlash exploded beyond sports talk radio. The Sanders name carries weight in pop culture. This isn't just about die-hard football purists. It resonates with casual fans, celebrities, and influencers who align with the Sanders movement. In that sense, Stefanski may have drastically underestimated the leverage and visibility attached to the situation. Critics argue he operated with that old-school belief that the head coach is untouchable royalty and the rookie is supposed to kneel and comply. But Shedeur didn't need Kevin Stefanski to stay relevant. And now the Falcons are absorbing the shockwave of a cultural backlash after tying themselves to a coach who seemingly believed he could overpower one of the most influential families in modern sports. So where are the players in all this? Why haven't current Falcons stepped up to a microphone to challenge their new leader? According to circulating reports, they have spoken, just not publicly. Insider chatter claims there's resistance inside the locker room, away from cameras and recorders. Veteran players are rumored to have held players-only meetings to air serious concerns about the hire. They've reviewed what unfolded in Cleveland. The thinking, according to those whispers, is simple. If a coach was willing to undermine a talent like Shedeur-Sanders to protect himself, what's stopping him from doing it again? But NFL contracts come with strict non-disparagement language. Publicly criticizing a head coach could mean heavy fines, reduced roles, or being branded a locker room problem. So, if the reports are accurate, players have allegedly chosen quieter channels. Anonymous communication, backdoor support for fan organizers, subtle encouragement to keep the pressure on. The message, as it's described, is clear. We can't say it out loud, but we're paying attention. If true, it's an unusual alignment, fans acting as the loud public shield for a locker room constrained by business rules. And all of that mounting tension circles back to one person, Falcons owner Arthur Blank. Known as one of the league's more fan-conscious owners, Blank is said to be singularly focused on winning. Now in his 80s, his priority is cementing a legacy by delivering a Super Bowl to Atlanta before his chapter closes. Arthur Blank brought in Kevin Stefanski chasing stability. He wanted a seasoned, offensive-minded head coach who could steady the franchise and finally steer it back on course. Instead of calm waters, critics argue he may have strapped a ticking time bomb to his own legacy. Now he's staring at a billionaire's dilemma. Does he swallow his pride, admit the hire was a mistake, and move on from Stefanski before week 1? That would mean absorbing millions in buyout money and risking embarrassment in front of fellow owners. Or does he double down, protect the decision, and send Stefanski onto the sideline anyway? That path could mean half-empty seats, alienating a fan base that has stood by the franchise for decades, and presiding over a locker room rumored to be uneasy with its leader. Blank's legacy feels like it's balancing on a tightrope, and kickoff is getting closer by the day. Meanwhile, familiar media voices have stepped in to defend the establishment. Television analysts urge patience, insisting every coach makes mistakes and that Stefanski should be judged on what he does in Atlanta, not Cleveland. But critics reject that logic outright. They argue character doesn't reset with a change of zip code. A blown fourth down call is a mistake. Poor clock management is an error. Those are coachable flaws. However, they claim that deliberately undermining a young quarterback and allowing damaging narratives to spread for self-preservation is something deeper. To them, the Cleveland chapter exposed who Stefanski truly is. They fear that if adversity hits Atlanta, he'll revert to deflection, point fingers, and search for a scapegoat. Supporters of the protest say they're not obsessing over the past, they believe they're forecasting the future. And in their eyes, this saga transcends both Stefanski and Shedeur. They see it as a broader shift in power, a moment where fans challenge the long-standing belief that NFL owners operate like untouchable royalty. For years, critics say owners operated as if they could hire anyone, make any decision, and fans would dutifully line up to buy jerseys and fill seats without question. Now, the Atlanta Falcons fanbase is trying to prove that era of automatic loyalty is finished. They argue they are the true financial engine of the league, and without their emotion, attention, and spending power, the NFL machine doesn't move. Whether Arthur Blank eventually yields to the mounting pressure and parts ways with Kevin Stefanski, or digs in and risks watching sections of his stadium sit empty on Sundays, supporters of the movement believe the warning has already been delivered. In their view, you can't undermine a player behind closed doors and expect the public not to bring the entire story into the spotlight.